you would, let's go ahead and grab our Bibles out, and we're going to go to Psalm 23. Again, if you don't have a Bible with you, there are Bibles in these baskets underneath the chairs around you that you can borrow today or keep and still and take home and keep it for your very own. And then also YouVersion is up and running. But I want to get back into this kind of smaller study series that we're in. We just started last week. We're going to conclude it, as far as I know, next week, as we've been going through Psalms chapter 23. It's a key chapter that I've been going through over the last about 8 weeks now, that just is so full of so much rich truth and promises and instruction that I wanted to dig into it together as we look at how does God restore our soul. Where is the source of that restoration? How does that work? What choices can we make that open up those doors or those things that He has already richly promised that sometimes we get in the way of? And last week, we focused in on the first 3 verses of this particular song that David wrote. David, who had spent the first part of his life as a shepherd, again, a humbling job, but also a unique job that takes a unique individual that has both gentleness and strength. But now he's in his later years, in his king years, where he has the authority and he has power, but nonetheless, he also has some very tough times. And in one of these tough times, he sits down with his gifts of music and his gift of writing lyrics to be able to write something from his heart to cry out to God that many of us can resonate with as well when we're going through tough seasons. So the first 3 verses that we looked at were again, just the introduction. I think just have so much truth and beauty within it when he wrote the beginning of this psalm, where he says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me on paths of righteousness for His name's sake." Now, if you missed last week's study, I ask, and this is definitely within this study, I kind of encourage you to go back and watch the podcast. All these build on top of each other, all of them intertwined within each other to really bring out the fullness of what David has to share with us when we're going through times of challenge. But I will give you a little bit of recap. Again, there's just, to me, an overwhelming gospel presentation when he cries out that the God, the Lord, Yahweh Himself, the one with no beginning, the one with no end, the great I am, the truth, the power, the awesomeness, is my personal shepherd, that He leads me, that He gives me rest, that He provides for me, that He protects for me. It's a very beautiful start of just the immensity of God and how through Jesus Christ, that if we accept Him as leader and forgiver in our lives, by acknowledging with our mouths He's the Son of God, and believing in our hearts He died and rose again, that He's our personal shepherd with all the gentleness and all the strength that we see within David's early days. And when we look at Him making us lay down in green pastures and resting, that I think resonates to a lot of people. I've heard a lot of people talk this week about needing that, and some who have kind of taken up the challenge I was given last week of setting apart a set amount of time to just rest in God, get into the Scripture and listen to the Lord, and be able to have that moment of resting before God, so you are rested to then stand up and follow beside the still waters and follow on the paths of righteousness. Because again, He doesn't lead us on any other path. He leads us on this path of righteousness. And that to me is just a very beautiful visual. It's a very just kind of deep breath visual. But the question comes up at some point within the conversation of, but what about those days when it doesn't feel like there's a lot of green pasture around? And what about those days where the path doesn't seem all that smooth? It doesn't seem like the waters are still beside. Just things are overwhelming. Things are challenging. I'm fighting depression. I'm fighting loneliness. I've got stress bearing down on me to the point that I barely think I can stand anymore. It almost feels like it's not Him making me lay down, but the world that's making me crash and burn around me. What about those days? What about those challenges? It almost kind of seems overly surreal here, overly poetic and dreamy here. But it's not. We just haven't gotten to that part. When he digs into verse 4, if you look at verse 4, he kind of leads into that very clearly when he says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod, your staff, they comfort me. This is a very open and honest explanation that he's like, I get that. I've been there too. I understand how the world can feel that way and how the world acts that way, and that we can be in places of deep distress and deep hurt and deep pain. So let's break this apart a little bit and look at it and see what we find together. I just want to start out with looking at the valley of the shadow of death. This is usually the line that makes this a popular psalm for funerals. I've got resources that help me plan weddings. I have resources that help me plan baby dedications, resources that help you plan funerals. And in the funeral book, it's probably in 60% of the book, time and time again, Psalms 23. It's a very popular one within that range. And I'm not beating that up. I actually just officiated the funeral for a dear friend of mine by the name of David, who passed away about a week and a half ago. David was one of my nursing home buddies, but he was more than that. I've known David now for almost 4 years, and it had transpired by, and again, I have full love for all of my residents, don't get me wrong at all, but something happened there that just became a little deeper. The friendship was a little deeper. The conversations were deeper. The brotherhood between us was deeper. There was just a complete and total honest sense of weight when he says, Tom, I just want to make sure you know I love you. David, I love you too. And a lot of that came from the challenges that he went through, the valley of the shadow of death that he went through. Now, that's not talking about when he died. That's not just talking about the times when we sat in the hospital and he just felt like the whole world was crushing in on him and that physically he couldn't do it anymore. It's the times when things were overwhelming that he just felt like he was in deep darkness, and the honest conversations that we had and were able to share with each other that built that kind of trust, built that kind of friendship. When you're seeing someone in the room and all the lights are out because they just want the environment to match what's going on internally. And there's just saying, Tom, I think I'm done. It's because they're in a valley of the shadow of death. Now, death is translated in the Hebrew not just to death, but of deep darkness. And those are some of the moments they had. But you know, the thing I just loved about David is he never once gave up faith. He never gave up. This is why I just say he's a giant. He was a giant in my life. It's because he just never gave up on faith. I know God's got me. I'm following the Lord. I just wish he would take me home, but if it's not my time, I'm not going to go home. It's just a perspective that I pray that I have when days get that dark. Now, when I think valley, I kind of get a little bit of a wrong impression. I think of Smoky Mountains. I know some of you guys have been to Townsend. Scott and Carrie honeymooned there and went to a couple of anniversaries there, and then she got tired of being with him in the cabin, so they stopped going. But I don't know what happened there. I think kids happened there, didn't it? Yeah, that happens too. Oh, okay. We love you, Scott. He didn't even look to see if I was serious. Okay. I was, brother. But in Townsend, Tennessee, it's a valley. The whole town is in a valley. It's a very small town. It's one street that kind of goes down the middle. There's some restaurants and stuff before you shoot off, go up into the woods to find your cabin. And it's gorgeous and it's wonderful. I remember one year we were down there after Christmas. A lot of times we'll go down after Christmas to New Year's as kind of a rest and break after everything's been so crazy. And the storm rolled in. And this is when Ryan was still probably about junior high. We just sat on the front porch and let that storm roll in. You could see all of it coming over the mountains, and then the lightning got close, and we went inside because we got scared. But this is not the valley that David's talking about here. It's not lush, and it's not green, and it's not a place where you go on vacation. When you're looking in the hillsides of Judea, when you're looking at where he and his family worked, when you're talking valley, you're actually talking ravine. You're talking a place where there is no greenery, there is no shrubbery. You're talking about a place that's jagged rocks and very hard terrain that you would have to pass through to get to another area. And so when he talks about the valley of the shadow of death, he's actually really, as far as how we would define things and the way we say things, he's talking about the rocky ravine of deep darkness that happens in our lives. And I think a lot of us have related with that at different times in our lives that we've gone through deep darkness. I think some of us in this room are experiencing that today and trying to hold on to faith and trying to hold on hope to go through that kind of darkness. And I think there's a lot here that David gives to us, that the Holy Spirit wants to speak to our hearts, to help us and assist us and minister to us there. The first thing I want to look at with you is three main, I won't say the three. I hate when pastors or people put these are the two things or the three things. There's usually more than what I can come up with. But kind of the three main things that put us in this ravine of deep darkness. A couple of them we talk about quite often. I think the third one is the one that David focuses in, but we'll make sure we get it all out on the table. The first one, I think, that puts us in this kind of valley of deep darkness, sometimes is our own choices. Sometimes our own choices put us into deep darkness. It might be because we just did something really, really stupid. As we looked last week of being compared to sheep and why it was such a valid explanation of us at times, and if we're just being humble and honest about it, we are stupid sometimes. We're dumb sometimes. We make decisions that are not the best. We make decisions that are for our own gratification and are for our own immediate need or want, to be quite frank about it. And sometimes there's repercussions, there's ripple effects of those decisions that we must walk through that can put us into deep darkness. At other times, it could be just a lack of wisdom, a lack of taking a pause before you make that decision, getting into God's Word, getting godly counsel, looking at God's principles before you make a decision that can lead us into some pretty messed up places. And sometimes it's just downright sin. Sometimes it's just we know we shouldn't do it. God doesn't want us to do it, but yet we step right into those areas for our own wants and our own needs. And it can cause all kinds of things, from a loss to a job and financial stability to a loss of a relationship because of your gossip or because of your backstabbing. It could be several things that kind of gone into a place that somebody else or something else went outside your grasp, and you lost promotion within your life that God wanted for you because you chose your own path. There's a lot of different things that can put us into a place that can put us into deep darkness that I had control over. And if you roll with me a little bit, I think that's why when he starts talking about that your rod and your staff comfort me, that some things start to come into play that kind of help us see things from God's perspective, move in new ways, and be able to grow up a little bit spiritually, maturity-wise within our lives. The rod, that's kind of the one that focuses in, I think, when I was looking at this, to me get myself into dumb places, and sometimes maybe even you getting yourself into some dumb places. Your rod comforts me is a unique and, be honest, mature statement. The shepherd had two main tools that he worked with, the rod and also the staff that he used. And the rod they were mostly for discipline and for protection. And how a shepherd would make a rod is he would go up to the sapling, kind of like a long stem, and he wouldn't pull it out of the ground, but he would get down on his knees and he would dig it out by hand. So he would get the fullness of the root, and the root was kind of claw-like. And what a shepherd would do is we'd be able to get that out, and then on the nice day, sitting underneath a tree, getting some shade while the sheep are eating, he would get a knife out and he would work on that, especially that claw area, until it was a perfectly round ball that was nice and smooth. And then he would cut the sapling to the point that would be about, 3 feet long. And they got very, very skilled of using these as a club or almost kind of as a javelin. If things were outside of their reach, that they could throw those with great precision. And as David goes back and remembers those days and says, your rod comforts me, when you look at some of the principles of the rod, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And other principles of the rod, you're like, I don't know if I'm all that crazy about that. For instance, let's say the sheep's out there and he's kind of gone a little bit further out than what the shepherd can just kind of run to. And he looks up and there's a bear or there's a lion upon that sheep, coming close to that sheep. He could use that with great force and great precision to really damage that bear or that lion. He could throw it and hit them in such a way. I mean, you remember how he took a stone and took out Goliath? He would just throw that for the protection of the lamb and would save the lamb from being mauled or being killed or being eaten. And I like that analogy. When I'm kind of straight off, a little bit too far, I'm not close to the shepherd right there, but I start walking into something with the enemy, and the enemy takes a hit for it. That comforts me. I like that. Another way that they would use the rod that's a little bit more like, okay, I kind of get it, but it's not as much fun, is when the sheep would get outside of where the shepherd is and he couldn't immediately get to them. And they're doing that eating an inch, moving an inch thing we talked about last week. Here's a little bit of grass, I'll eat it. Here's a little bit of grass, I'll eat it. A little bit of grass, kind of like how we live sometimes. And they get away from the shepherd, and they're getting close to a thorn bush, or they're getting close to a cliff, or they're getting close to where the enemy might be, and he can't see the enemy yet. He would throw that with great precision to hit right in front of the sheep to scare the living bejesus out of it. And it would jump and then and like run back towards the shepherd to save it from getting into deeper trouble than what it already has gotten itself into. I've had those moments in my life, have you not? God had to say, little sheep, and you jump and you're just kind of like, okay, let's get back over here, let's get things in track. He's getting my attention. It makes your heart skip a beat. It's a little challenging, but nonetheless, I'd rather that than the alternative. But it's not the only two ways that he would use it. As brutal as it sounds, in this day and in this culture, if a sheep had a habit of walking at great distances from the shepherd and it would not come close to the shepherd, he knew that if that continued, sooner or later he's losing that sheep. Sooner or later that sheep is going to get killed, mauled, hurt, damaged, something. So the practice they had at this time is that the shepherd would purposely break the leg of the sheep. His next step would to immediately put a splint around the leg of the sheep. Then his next step would be get oil and pour it over the injury to promote healing of the leg. His next step is to put the sheep over his shoulders because the sheep cannot walk at this point, and carry the sheep and work with the sheep until it started having healing and it started having strength to be able to walk again, and then he could put it back down on the ground. Now, the question is, why go through all that when the sheep was walking perfectly fine to begin with? Because what they found every single time and time again, that the sheep was broken, even by the shepherd, was mended by the shepherd, and the shepherd carried them, that when they were able to walk again, the sheep stayed very close to the shepherd from then on out. And there have been times in my life when I've gotten so off track that I needed broken. One of the most loving things that my God could do was break me. There was times that the only way I looked to him was to completely and totally be laid out on my back. So I was looking up and saying, okay, now I've got your attention. He doesn't do it to be mean. He doesn't do it to be harsh. He does it to teach us, train us, mature us, and so we can walk closer to the shepherd and enjoy that protection. It takes a great deal of maturity and strength and I think life experience to get to the point that you can look at the shepherd and says, your rod comforts me. Now, that's not the only way that we fall into place. That takes submission. It takes, I think, reconciliation. I think it takes repentance to get there. But there's also another way that we can end up in that ravine of deep, deep darkness. And it's not our place, but it's not something somebody else did. Something else that was completely and totally outside of our control. Something that other people use their free will. A lot of times when I hear people say, how could God possibly let this happen? It's usually actually something we did or something somebody else did within their free will that God gave us so that we're not just simply his puppets. Again, criticism. Maybe you have a dear friend that you find out's been ripping you apart behind your back. Some people are like, well, get over it. That happens to people. That's just what it's like to work in an office. Sometimes it can be so damaging that it can put you in a place of deep darkness when you thought you had someone who loved you and that you trusted. Maybe it's a spouse that has an affair. Maybe it's somebody made a bad decision to be driving when they've been drinking and takes your loved one. Several things could be someone else's decision that puts you into such a place that it just rocks your world and you feel like you're drifting aimlessly. It just feels like you're just getting through the day at best. You're not even sure if you're going to get it to lunch. And all of your direction and all your guidance is gone. Your rod and your staff comfort me in those deep, dark places. A staff would be kind of a similar starting point. He would go up to the sapling that was there, And instead of pulling it out, instead of digging it out, he would cut it off at the very bottom, making it nice and flat, kind of like a walking stick, if you will, or maybe a cane if someone needed something along those lines. And he would take that same knife that he'd worked on the other one and work on this and take off any thorns and make it nice and smooth through the whole process, and probably make it about, I don't know, 5.5 feet tall. And then he would do kind of a unique thing. He would wet the entire reed down to the point that it became bendable. And it kind of reminds me a little bit, I don't know, this is when I realized I'm now middle age. I don't know if you guys still do this or not. And if I'm really honest, I think they did it 20 years before my time. So I didn't wear baseball caps, but this just comes to mind. But how baseball caps, I don't know if it's cool to have them flat or rounded right now, but when they had them rounded, Tom, you could tell me. I know you're on the cutting edge of this. Okay, yeah, rounded, okay. Yeah, we're in the same generation, I can tell. But the rounded, you would wet it, and then you put the baseball in there, right? And you put the rubber band around it, you would let it dry, and then it would stay like that. That's what he would do with the reed. He would bend it a certain way, tie it to keep that hook on the end of it where it's at, let it dry, take the string off. Now he's got a walking stick that he can direct with, that he also has this hook on the end that fits around the underbelly of a sheep, especially the young sheep. And that is what he would use for direction and for salvation a lot of times of these sheep. And I really kind of like this aspect, and it kind of encourages me a little bit, because even though I can get directionless when I'm in despair, even though I can get directionless when I'm being stupid, when I'm close to the shepherd, he doesn't have to scare the bejesus out of me with this rod. He can just simply take the staff and he can give me direction. Now it's more gentle. I'm looking to him, I'm trusting him, and he can direct me with that staff and be there for my direction when I just can't do it anymore. When I can't find that focus, when I don't know what the next tone is. My shepherd is there with the staff. When I get close to those thorny bushes, when I get close to that cliff, he can direct me gently. Even if I take a couple of extra steps, I get really stupid and I go a little faster, then he can get me with that direction, and I go over that cliff and now I'm stuck on a cliff underneath. Or if I go in that thorn bush and I'm stuck in the middle of all those thistles and can't move anymore, now he can take that hook and get it around me and lift me back to him. It's a much gentler way. But surely your rod and your staff comfort me. But I don't think that's how David got into where he is when he's writing a song. Because the third way is simply this. The real truth of it all is there's times when we end up in the ravine of deep darkness simply because God led us there. That takes maturity. That takes some life lessons. But look at how David put all this. You made me lay down and rest. You got me back up. I'm following you. I'm beside still waters. Love that scene. I'm on a righteous path. Everything's going good. Then all of a sudden, even though I might end up in the valley of the shadow of death, even though you lead me through a dark time, I'm still going to follow you. I'm still right here. God has led him into a dark time. And God would do that sometimes with us to get us to where we need to be. We might not understand it. We might like yesterday a whole heck of a lot and want to go back. But he knows more than I do. He has a bigger picture than you do of where he's guiding you to be. For instance, if we go back to David's day as a shepherd, there is a season within that country that all the green grass and the beautiful meadows and all the things that he was just relaxing in is very plush. But when the seasons change and the waters come down the mountainside, all that gets flooded out and anything within it dies. And the only way at that point is to take your sheep from that area before that happens through the ravine to get to the higher ground where the green grass is. So while the sheep is thinking, man, yesterday was good, there's all this green shrubbery, why in the world are we going through this? It's because the shepherd knows the danger that's there tomorrow and is leading you to a better place than as you continue to go through the path. Think about this from a sheep standpoint, because again, they'll kind of do the inch by inch thing. Can you imagine kind of going inch by inch? And quite frankly, I think this is kind of how we live life sometimes. You're going inch by inch, and there's plenty of grass, there's plenty of grass, there's plenty of grass. That's a little bit more sparse. That's a little brown. That's okay. I got grass. And then all of a sudden, there's nothing. And for the first time in a long time, you look up, and all you've got is not inch of grass, but you've got miles of rocks with no greenery whatsoever. And you're sitting there, and you look at the shepherd, you're like, seriously? Right? Have you ever had that moment? There's like no green grass to be found. You can't see over the hill. The shepherd knows where the green grass is, but you have no clear idea what's going on. And you have to decide whether or not you're going to trust the shepherd. We've been in those places. We've been in those places. But he knows where he's leading you. And the choice simply comes down to whether or not you trust him. Even though you lead me through a valley of deep darkness, of death itself, I can't imagine a worse place to be. I will fear no evil. I'm not saying the evil doesn't exist. I'm just saying I'm not going to fear it because I trust you, shepherd. I trust you, Lord. I put my life into your hands. When you're in those situations, can you look at the shepherd, look him right in his face, and say, Yahweh, you are my shepherd. I love you. I trust you. Your rod, it comforts me. I know there's going to be times that I'm going to try to buck you on this. I'm going to fight with you on this. I'm going to go in some messed up places. Your rod comforts me. You grow me. You disciple. I know I'm going to kind of get off track. I know I'm probably going to fall and get into some dumb things. Your staff, it comforts me. It comforts me. I feel no evil because you're with me. I can draw close to you. You're with me. And I can lean into you. One of the things that's awesome within this phrasing, and make sure you don't miss this, is as he is speaking in this fourth verse, if you look with me here, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me. If you look at verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, the first part of verse 4, this is the first time that David is speaking to God instead of about him. It's no longer, you're my shepherd, I shall not want. It's no longer telling people about God and the source of your hope. But all of a sudden the intimacy comes into full play that in the darkest of the hours, he cries out, you are with me. I was going through a study, and for those of you guys, again, Right Now Media is a Bible study tool that's available for our church that anybody can use. If you don't have it, let me know. We'll send you an invite. It's kind of like Netflix of video Bible studies that you can use as part of your discipleship. And one of them is led by a lady that I absolutely cannot pronounce her name. It's Nancy DeMoss Wogelmoth. I know that's not right. What is it? Sure. I'm not sure. But if you want to see it, no, we'll worry about it later. But if you want to check it out, send me an email and I'll send you a link. And actually, I can do that through Right Now Media, send it straight to you so that you can look at it. It's 4 weeks, 5 weeks on Psalms 23. It's a powerful, powerful study. And when she's talking about this particular section, she says this, and I thought this was just blockbuster. When things are prosperous, when things are going good, we talk about God. But when we come to that valley of deep darkness, we talk to God. When things are prosperous, we talk about God. But when we come to that valley of deep darkness, we talk to God. There are seasons in our life, and I used to teach on this a lot, and I haven't talked about this for a while. We see this within Scripture. We see it within our own lives, that there are times that God has us in a place of structure and a time that He has us in a place of exile. If you look at it from the Israelite standpoint, when they were in slavery with the Egyptians, before Moses was used to lead them out, they were in a place of structure. It was slavery. It was not fun. It was hard labor. But at the end of the night, you knew you had a roof over your head. You were hungry. You knew where to go get the food. You got injured on the job. You knew who the doctor was. You knew how to get healing within that physician. Everything made sense. It wasn't where they should be. Sometimes structure is good, sometimes it's bad. In this case, they're not in the place that they're enjoying, but they have security. Once God delivered them from the slavery that they were crying out against, next thing you know, they're in the desert. And it's no longer structure, but it's exile. And you no longer have that roof over your head. And you're not quite sure how you're going to get food for tomorrow. It's the big struggle and trouble when it came to manna and water coming out of rock. So you didn't really know what was going to happen next. All that structure was taken away. But you know what they did? They drew close to God. And I'm convinced that there's times that he puts us in places of structure where everything makes sense and we can have our goals and we can have our movement and things are prosperous and we talk about God and we tell others about the goodness of God and we are thankful to God. But there's times that one of the most loving acts he can do is take some of that away, because quite frankly it doesn't take too much to shake us up, or all of it away to put us into a place of exile so that we say, Daddy, and we come running and grab a hold of him because we've forgotten what it feels like to be close and to trust and have faith and do things that don't make sense to the rest of the world, to be able to be on a path of righteousness instead of a place of the world.